Welcome to Be On It, episode 18.
Hey Jessica, what's going on in the beehive today?
Hi, Debbie. I was just thinking about criticism. I know what criticism is, but I was like, what's the definition? So I looked up Wikipedia, and it says that criticism is the construction of a judgment about the negative or positive qualities of someone or something. So I thought that was kind of interesting because I think of negative criticism when I think of criticism. I think of it in a negative connotation. And as oneself projecting their own insecurities and deflecting to distract from one's own flaws. That's how I've always personally kind of thought about it. That's why, we criticize is because we don't want to admit that we have that issue or address that. What do you think about that? Have you ever thought about it in that way?
When I think about criticism, all I want to say is eat because because on the one hand, it's hard to give criticism to certain people, and then on the other hand, it's hard to receive the criticism. So all the way around, it just has a very negative connotation for me, this idea of criticism. And then you said in that particular definition, it's judgment. That's you, yeah. It's judgment. And what was the rest of that definition? Can you
So
read
it
it again?
says you mean my definition of what
Or
I think?
the no,
The Wikipedia.
yeah.
It says criticism is the construction of a judgment about the negative or positive qualities of someone or something. So it really isn't meant to be just negative. But in
Right.
society, I feel like we get a lot more negative than we do positive,
Yeah, and is that
constructive
because
feedback.
exactly, and is that because we're always fixated, human nature being what it is, we're always kind of fixated more on the negative versus the positive.
Well, I think it comes from our own insecurities and our own issues that we're projecting onto others. We're deflecting our own issues, and so we criticize others, but it's really about us. That's what I personally think. And as a young kid, of course, I'd be sad and I'd be hurt if somebody were criticizing me and making me feel a certain way. And of course, that has happened to me. But as I've gotten older, I realize that's a them problem, not a me problem. That's something within them that they are not feeling good about, and so they're taking it and projecting it onto me and trying to make it a me problem, but I'm not taking it in. And so that, not everybody can do that, but it's taken a lot of time for me to go, that's not an issue that I'm going to take on.
And also, this with this idea of perfection, nobody's perfect. So if I was perfect, then maybe I could, in a way, give criticism to somebody without deflecting my own stuff, but I'm not
Right.
perfect and nobody is.
Well, we're all critical based on our human experience. There's two types of criticism. There's positive and there's negative.
Right.
Positive is a constructive, supportive way of, and as you like to say, you don't like the word criticism because it just has that negative connotation. So let's say feedback.
Yeah.
So, in that way, if it's helps to benefit you to make you better, let's say, for instance, you're learning a new skill and somebody comes to you and they say, hey, you're doing such a great job, but here's where I see that if you do X, Y, and Z, it might help you to be learn that skill a little faster from my experience. And then you would take that as a support that they really are invested in making sure that I understand and, try to achieve the best version of my skill. Then you would take that in a more positive way
Yeah.
versus when you do that, well, hearing that just makes you want to like sink in. I think of like when you hear positive criticism, it's like a flower that blooms. You want to soak it in, take in that light. But when you hear negative criticism, you want to close and shut down. Yeah. I went on to kind of look at an article called from worldpulse.org. And according to Linda Berlin Kamara, she wrote an article about the impact of negative criticism. And she talks about how negative criticism affects an individual's well being, self esteem, and overall mental health. And think about how you feel when people criticize you. Like we were talking about earlier, you just want to shut down. It makes you, like you said, it makes you feel icky.
It
And so
does.
it's like, I think we have to think before we speak, which I am guilty of, like, speaking before I think. And it's taken time and maturity and like healing of my own issues and not projecting my stuff onto other people that I can just I've always had empathy, but like I'm quick to respond. If I feel hurt, I'm going to respond with something right on back. And now I have to stop and think, where is that coming from that they made that comment? Where is that hurt coming from that they're projecting that onto me? And so that's taken maturity, that's taken healing and growth and knowing that it's not a me issue. And I think that you could easily get defensive, especially when we're young and we're not as mature and we don't have the life experience. Or everybody has different traumas or different upbringing culturally. Criticism can be really prominent in one's life and it sticks with you. And how do you heal from that? How do you get away from that where it's not making you feel like it's a you issue?
Well, yeah, I think that's what we were talking about. My prior experiences, criticism has such a negative connotation. And then I was thinking, like, who doesn't have a negative connotation with criticism? Because it's hard. Criticism it's just a hard concept to swallow. But then and then in my mind, I was like, who's impervious to criticism? And if you look at it that way, where you're kind of doing a deeper dive into what's behind the criticism, then I guess that's one way that you can look at it in a different way.
It was almost like a way of better understanding human nature for me. Like, why do we do this? Why is this person saying this to me? That's not like we shouldn't be talking to people like that. And I also learned it also helped me to talk to people in a factual way and not attacking way. And am I guilty of doing that in the past? Oh yeah. Do I sometimes still do that? Sure. And then I have to correct myself, be accountable and go, you know what? That was not very kind of me and I apologize. I think that is maturity and that's growth and that's healing, but I'm not perfect.
Do you feel like it's a lack of communication too?
I think it's lack of communication. I think it's being feeling hurt. Deep down, you're hurt about something. You're hurt or you're mad or you're frustrated or you're angry. All of these feelings that you've repressed, right? And they just kind of sometimes they come up and they come out of your mouth. Sometimes do you ever find yourself saying something you're like, where did that come from? And you're like, I don't know why I said that because that's not really who I am. And then I have to apologize because that for me, somewhere there was something going on and that just came out of my mouth. And I'm like, I have to address it. It's embarrassing when that happens, if it's something negative.
Mhm. Because I'm just thinking about, and this is a very superficial thing, but like a dirty room or you see a mess in the house, and then you see that occurring often. It's just not a one off. And so then you can become critical of that person's um their ability to keep things clean and orderly. And the reason why I said lack of communication is if I had more communication with that person and realized that their intention wasn't that, but they just weren't getting around to it, or they had these obstacles in the way, then I could just have more empathy and not go to the place where I'm offering the criticism in a negative way, because that's kind of what happens with me. Why is it that I'm more open to or more apt to provide that negative criticism to my close contacts versus other people? I mean, of course, I really wouldn't offer to strangers because I don't even know them.
I
So there's something about it's not just all negative when you really kind of break it down. There's something behind it that there's some closeness.
with our previous episode where we talked about ego, id, and super ego, I think it's like all of these things, society, culturally, the instant gratification versus, our ego being the mediator of everything. I think it's all of that. And I think it's us sometimes we're projecting ourself onto others and expecting the same thing. And I had to learn this too. My work ethic's not the same as somebody else's work ethic, and that's okay. Their process is different. Why am I projecting my expectation onto them? And that was a really hard one for me to learn because I go to work and I am like zipping around. I'm doing things. I'm there to work and I'm there a certain amount of hours and I'm there to be as helpful as I can be. And that is definitely a super ego id thing. Instant gratification, getting those tasks marked off. What does society say? What's the expectation? What can I Why do what can I be lenient on? What do I have to focus on? All of that is a part of criticism as well. And criticism and judgment, two separate things. But I think that with criticism, we go on the attack. What if it's a negative connotation? Judgment, we judge before we go on the attack. We're judging based off of society, based off of everything and expectation, and then we go on the attack and criticize. And why do we do that? Because we're not perfect humans and our life experience, the way we grew up, the culture that we grew up in, the country we grew up in, all affects what expectation is of a person. And if you grew up in a different culture and I grew up in a different culture and I'm putting my culture onto you that you grew up in a different culture expectation, it's like, how is that fair? Does that make sense? Is that confusing? Because I'm kind of confusing myself, but that's the way I think of it.
I feel like it depends on the issue. I think
Yeah,
that there are certain things that are in place. For instance, when you think about work and, like if you have to get certain things done at work,
right,
because it's not an option. That's what you're
right,
there. And it's a kind of a contractual thing too. Like you're getting paid to do XYZ, right? That's in your job description. So in that way, it's justified in my point of view, but the way in which you deliver it, there's a there's a way to do it that's going to be a better way of promoting change.
right. I agree. And what do you do in that situation? Because I've had this come up where you have tried to do it in a constructive way and there's just no response. I've just learned that I have tried and it is what it is, and that's a management issue, not my issue. Where I work, they encourage you to speak to that person if you're having an issue. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I do it from a very fair stance. I always like to say, is something going on? Are you okay? Because I don't know persons, and that's coming from a compassionate, empathetic place. Because wonder if something is going on in their life at home and it's kind of carried over to their work thing and it's not, it's becoming a habit. Um, I like to address that first because that's, human nature being empathetic. But then if it carries on despite that, you start to get frustrated. And I did. I'd get frustrated with certain situations. And then I was like, this is not healthy for me. I got to focus on me. That is their issue. That is not my issue any longer. And I'm not taking it on. And that's what I had to do. And like they have something going on where this is not important to them.
That is true. But it's at the same time, I guess, in a work situation, when it's a team situation, it does affect you because if it puts more work on your plate, it does. Then it's now not just a them issue. It's a we issue. It's
Right.
a us issue.
And you go to management and you talk to them about it, and then it's up to them to deal with it, and they do. They listen, yeah. So, I mean, I've done everything in the healthiest way I can do it, and and then looking at it now as a mature person, it's like, okay, people in a team setting, when there's somebody new that you're training, you're wanting to make sure that you give them all of the basics and the knowledge from your experience. But I always like to say, you're going to make it your own. We're not the same person, and this is how I do things, but if you find a way that works better for you, that's great. As long as you're accomplishing the things that you have to accomplish within your work time frame, you're good. The goal is to be as helpful as possible to, to our team.
Hmm. Right.
And if you love what you do and you care about what you do, you want to make that happen. And for me, I want to.
I think that's a good approach when you approach somebody. Obviously, one to one is a good idea. And when you approach it, if it's a team setting situation, then hey, this is our common goal. Like this is our common goal. But I'm seeing this. I mean, it's I don't know, it's factual. This is my perspective. I am seeing this. And um like how is this, I don't know even how I would approach it because it's so delicate and people get so defensive about things when you approach them and give them feedback. So I would say this, like you establish and maintain a good relationship with that person.
Professional setting, you have to be professional about the way that you are giving feedback. It's it's all to make us a well-functioning unit, and I do think that in work, management has been very good about addressing some negative things that are going on. They will bring it up and they will say, "This is the expectation. Remember what we require. Remember what you signed when you started here about being professional and about, yada, yada, yada." They're really good at that, and it's in a very I think a very positive way. Reminds you, straighten up.
And I always find that people are more open and willing. You don't want to drag somebody into doing something. You want them to come voluntarily and bring all of their talents with them, right? It's like a horse. It's hard to drag a horse, but you can lead a horse. It's easier to lead. So you want to draw people into that greater goal and how they can be an asset to the goal. So however way you could do that and keep it on the positive. But then on the other hand, I'm looking at one-to-one personal contacts. And I wanted to kind of do the same thing, but in a more understanding way. Like when I approach my children or people that I know in a more personal way, I'm seeing this or I'm noticing this. Because when you say you notice, it's not super judgy, but it's an observation. I'm observing something and help me to understand or even go a step further and say, is there anything I can help you with? Because I've always kind of thought that with my kids, I'm like, well, you need to keep your room a certain way. Why aren't you doing that? But maybe if I approach it like, hey, I'm noticing this. Is this what you want? Are you getting any value out of this? And if not, instead of just saying, do this and this and this by the end of this day or by the end of the week, but maybe I can take a step further and say, is there a way I can help you achieve your goal in regards to XYZ?
And let end goal is for this to be for you to have this straightened up. What's going on that's buffering that happening? Like I feel like talking down to kids doesn't help. Like leveling with them and not putting them on the attack is so much better than just saying, "Hey, how can I help you achieve this? Here's the expectation. This is what I would like. What's going on with, life right now?" Because I don't like what's going on in your teenage life that, this isn't getting completed. And they'll tell you, they'll say, "I am really overwhelmed. I've got all this stuff going on. I'm in a sport, yada, yada." And kids these days are very on the go. And so adding that thing, that just isn't a priority to them. And so maybe we have to dial back, lessen some of the things in order to make sure that we are. And I do think that we are a society of instant gratification and a society of overloading ourselves with things. There's no room for all the little tiny expected things. And it's like, I don't think kids intentionally don't want to do that thing. I just think their cup is already full and they don't have any more that they can give.
And then it goes back to the lack of communication. So if you don't know
Right,
that, then how could
right.
you understand and be empathetic to that? And I will say this too, that when we're talking about criticism, I think the empathy can spring out of the fact that I'm my worst critic. I really am. I can be pretty hard on myself. And so I never say that I do anything really well because, oh, you could have done this better and this better and this better. So I'm my worst critic. And I feel like a lot of people are too.
And my worst critic, but you know what? I'm getting better. I'm doing some self-care and self-love and saying, "You know what? I'm doing the best I can. I'm looking at why I'm doing this and why I did it in the past and what I'm doing differently now." So I think that's just giving me a little bit more self-love and confidence and just more willing to be open with people too and just put myself out there a little bit more.
Here's another thing too, is that I've lived in the light of making criticism a very negative thing and I kind of avoid it. Because if you have to confront somebody with feedback that's not so great, it's very awkward and it puts you on the
It's
spot. And so it's uncomfortable and I try to avoid uncomfortable things sometimes. Let's reframe it because we're having this deep dive into this conversation and I'm not taking credit for these ideas. This particular what I'm going to just talk about just now, it's from Maria Montessori out of her book called The Absorbent Mind, and she very much had a passion for young children, but it's the acknowledgement of I'm not perfect and the articulation of I make mistakes, but I have the power to correct them. And vocalizing that too, that's what's going on for you. We don't have to stay stagnant. This is a quote that she says, errors divide men, but their correction is a means of union. So basically what I'm getting from her text and her lectures is that we can be divided because of the mistakes that we make. But if we look at it in a positive way, have the empathy, have the communication, and how can we make this conflictual situation more peaceful and harmonic? Is that, hey, this is going on, and how can I help you? How can I work with you? How can I be a support for you? And change it around. That's kind of what I got out of this text is this, it doesn't have to be divisive. I have a real big friendliness with error, honestly. If you make a mistake, it's okay. It's
right.
okay. But how can and so if it's not okay with you, it can be very divisive when other people make mistakes. But because errors can be divisive, how can we turn it around and make it more so we're more cohesive together? And that's me reaching out to you.
Right. I totally agree. And to err is human. We have to fail in order to rise, right? If you don't ever fail and you go through life and you're like, I've never made a mistake in my life, that's not
It's not accurate.
normal. And having this expectation where you have to be a perfectionist, because I was guilty of this, like image, like they're like, oh my gosh, I have to mask my hurts because people don't want to see that you're hurting. And all these little things that I had to just go, stop it. This is who I am. I'm flawed, I'm human, and all of these unique things make up who I am, and you either take it or leave it. I don't care anymore. And so, with kids especially, you you're not raising children, you're raising adults, and you're trying to model and teach them. These are skills that you're going to need in the workforce. You're going to need this in life. You have to be able to balance out things. You can't over commit to things and not have enough room for the basic things you need to do in life. Everybody has to clean their home, everybody has to do their laundry. You have to grocery shop, you have to have some downtime, and you have to have playtime. It's all a balance. You can't like put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so we have to teach our kids
But reach out to them. Reach
with them
out
and
to
find out
them.
what's really going on. Like, what are you feeling right now? What's going on in your life? We're all busy. We forget. Sometimes we go in parent mode and we're like, I find myself guilty of doing this too. And I really had to like step back. I was projecting my need to keep things clean and would get mad at my family if they didn't clean up after themselves. It was criticism and it wasn't a positive thing. They were like, I'm not doing that. Like it wasn't received in a nice way. And so then I had to let it go and go, what's going on? I really like to see this get done by this time at the end of the day. I think that's a fair ask. Or what task would you like to do that you think you can do in a timely manner? And that worked for us. And they would let me know, hey, this isn't working. Can you do that this week and I'll come back and do that? I'm like, sure. Everybody had their tasks. And then with my spouse too. Like, I used to do everything, and I just stopped doing that. I was like, I am not enabling these people anymore. And I said, hey, we're all adults here. These are basic things that we have to get done. What would you like to do? If I do this, would you like to do this? And we had an agreement, and it works.
Yeah. And I'm getting this visual too, and I hope that everybody can get this visual too, is that when you see two people, it doesn't have to divide you. You can actually hold hands and, work together, is what I'm
Right.
thinking. And in the famous words of Maria Montessori, she says, and in this way, small things lead to great.
With that being said, this was such an interesting topic. And if you guys love what we're all about and want to continue to listen to our interesting topics that we discuss, join us next time on
See you
Beyond
next
It.
see you next time. We are all about community. Join our community by following and subscribing to Be On It through YouTube, Instagram, and of course your podcasting platform so we can continue to bring Be On It to you. Just so you know, this is for entertainment purposes only. We are speaking from our lived experiences and are not licensed therapists.